Everyone to today's webinar. On behalf of Melbourne's North Food Group, I hope you, your family and staff are all well in these very challenging times. And let's hope that we're coming out of the end of it and the economic recovery is not too far away for everyone. The Melbourne's North Food Group has been operating now for just over 2 years, and basically our role is to support food and beverage businesses to grow, and also to look at ways where we can help to save costs and provide additional value. So over the past probably six or so months, we've been working with Fulcrum Procurement, and we've been exploring a model, a group buying model, on how we can assist our food and beverage businesses to get better value from buying various ingredients, products, services, etc. So we thought it was pretty timely to introduce you to Peter Cook and also David Benedy from Fulcrum Procurement. And in today's presentation, they're going to give an update on the work they've been doing over the past few months, and in particular a pilot that they've done around micro testing and also sugar, to give you some of the exciting outcomes that are coming out of that, particularly with micro testing, that hopefully will be a benefit to you as well. And as I say, they'll go through that presentation today. As Margaret said, any questions you have, if you can fire them through chat, and Tyler will feed those in at the end of the presentation to Peter and David. And also, if you can mute your audio and also your video if possible, so that we can minimise interruption. And I'll now hand over to Peter Cook from Fulcrum to commence the presentation. Thank you, Peter.
Fantastic, thanks Tony. So we might just, David and I might introduce ourselves first and talk a little bit about who we are and where we come from, and then I'll share my screen and talk you through the presentation we've put together. So I've worked in the food industry for over 20 years now. I started off as a microbiologist at SPC up in Shepparton, so the micro tender was actually a good one to get started with. I've worked in R&D, operations and supply chain for Kraft, Mars and several other of the big food companies. I've been working as a consultant for the last 7 or 8 years, mostly focused on the food sector still. So I did spend a little bit of time working for Coles, so I developed their private label sourcing team and sourcing function for them. But really, my passion is the food sector and the food industry. I think that's where I like working. So the opportunity to work on a buying group like this has been really exciting for me. I'll hand over to David for a quick introduction.
I'm off mute now. My name's David. I've known Peter about 20 years. My background's actually in government and regulation, so I've got a good understanding of the economic and the policy environment. And like Peter, I moved to business consulting. I was with one of the top 4 for a while, and I really focused on strategy and operations and sourcing. And I've been working with Pete for about 5 years. And perhaps what Pete was too modest to mention is that Pete's been running his own businesses on food as well. So he's a food producer too. So he was running prosciutto into Coles for a while, and also I've been working with him developing veggie burgers. So we've been doing that together for about 5 years, and since December we've been setting up the Melbourne North Buying Group. Yeah, and that's my role and things.
Oh, brilliant, thanks David. So I'm just going to share my screen so we can go through the presentation. So the 3 things that we wanted to talk about with you today were to share some of our thoughts on what best practice procurement looks like and how to deliver savings from your third-party spend. Share some of the market insights that we're seeing at the moment, particularly with the disruption that's been happening, and then talk more about the buying group, how that's been set up, how it operates, and some of the initial results that we've got. So, the reason we focus a lot on procurement in our consulting work, and the reason we think that this buying group is such a good idea, is that when you look at the overall cost base of a typical food manufacturer, we see that often 70 or 80% of the total costs will be on external spend, whether it's raw materials or packaging, freight and logistics, or other overheads and indirects. So having a good solid procurement function and good capabilities around buying really can often make the difference between being really profitable and less so. So it's definitely an area that we think is worth focusing on. When we think about what best practice procurement means, there's three things that we think about. The first one is making sure that you've got a good, well thought through procurement and sourcing strategy. Then that you use a good, structured, rigorous sourcing process whenever you're going to market or sourcing things you need. And that you run an ongoing vendor management program where you meet with your key suppliers regularly and you're both working together to continuously improve the service and reduce cost. So we'll talk through those three things a little bit more.
Great. So when you're designing a sourcing strategy, the first thing you really need to do is understand the power balance of the respective parties. So that's your power as a buyer, your buying power, and the supplier power. And that's for the range of suppliers you're considering buying from in this particular market. Now, your buying power is largely determined by the volume you're ordering. That's what gives you the power to demand prices and terms. Supplier power, on the other hand, is largely driven by the concentration of suppliers, how many or how few of them there are in the market. That's what gives them the power to dictate prices and terms. Typically, when I do analyses with Peter, we see there are 4 different possible positions, really, and that's that 2x2 matrix on the right-hand side. So there are 4 combinations of low and high buyer power and low and high supplier power. It's important to know where you fall on this matrix, because this is really what determines the types of strategies that are available to you. So, for example, if you're in a situation where it's high buyer power and high supplier power, maybe I'm thinking Coles buying from Coca-Cola, they've got a very different set of strategies that are available to them in comparison to a situation where you have a buyer with low power and a supplier with high power. So think, for example, of a single bakery trying to source flour from some of Australia's large wheat mills. Indeed, a very different situation again, and range of strategies available where the buyer has low power and the supplier has low power. So an example of that might be a sushi roll outlet sourcing paper napkins on the open market. Now, it's important to do this for every category of goods and services that you're considering, because firstly, these really determine the types of strategies that are available for you, but there could well be a different power balance in relation to the different goods and services you're looking at. So you might sit in different quadrants depending on what you're trying to source. Thanks. So once you've identified the power balance between you and your supplier, you can then pick the strategies that are really going to help you reduce costs and maximize value. This graphic here shows the same 2x2 as in the last slide, that it's the same 4 combinations of low and high buyer power and low and high supplier power. But it shows the overarching types of strategy available in each of the 4 quadrants, and it gives some examples. So I'll just walk you through them quickly. So if we start in a situation with low buying power and high supplier power, so that's the top left, really the strategies that are available to you there are all about changing the nature of demand. Now, in effect, in these situations, the buyers have very low power to call the shots. So these strategies are really around minimizing the spend to the extent possible with this supplier. So in the simplest form, this would be changing the supplier or changing the supply market where you can. More sophisticated versions might be in your new product design, where you work to minimize the role of inputs from particular suppliers. Or alternatively, something you can do is to try and standardize the inputs from suppliers in order to consolidate your volume. And so that would mean you order a smaller range of products from each supplier, but a larger volume, and that allows you to access better pricing for them. If we move now down to the situation where we have low buyer power and low supplier power, so that's the bottom left, now we're in a world of spend management. And this is a much better place to be. Comparatively, you've got a lot more power as a buyer, and you're really competing more as equals together on this. So the strategies here are really about building and leveraging your buyer power. You have to get strategic about what you spend and with whom. You do your data analysis, you do benchmarking, you identify what the industry best rates are, and then you ask for them. Where possible, you start rationalizing your supply base. So you try to use fewer suppliers, but concentrate your volume amongst them. So you have more volume and better prices. And finally, one of the strategies we're very keen on is buying groups. And this is where a group of different producers all club together. They consolidate volume among them, and they access much better prices for the group as a whole. Really, what this does is it turns you into a super purchaser, and it really pulls your buying power over to the right. So if we look at situations on the bottom right, where you have medium to high buyer power and lowish supplier power, and you've got there either as being part of a buying group or being one of the larger producers, now you're in a position where you can start leveraging competition among the suppliers. You can really get them to compete with each other for your business. You can run a structured tender of several rounds and drive for better and better bids at each stage. And ultimately, if you're doing it well, you can start setting target pricing where you demand, where you say, look, we expect to see a certain level of pricing on certain items. And if you can't meet us there, then thank you, but we'll go and look for someone else who we think can. So that's a pretty rapid walkthrough of the types of strategy available in each quadrant. But the point of this is hopefully to show you why it's so important to identify your power balance for you and your supplier right at the outset, because this determines the types of strategies that are available for you when you're sourcing.
Great. And for me, the importance in doing this before you go to market or before you start talking to your suppliers is it allows you to think through where you stand and what your options are for reducing your costs or getting value. So once you've done that, the next step, or often no matter what strategy you're using or what levers you're using, often you do end up having to go to market through a tender or an RFP to be able to choose a supplier and put arrangements in place. So we see a wide variety of methods and ways that this is done. Often buyers will ring up their incumbent suppliers and ask for the latest pricing, or they use quite an ad hoc method. Others will use a much more structured, detailed process. And we consistently see that when companies use a good, structured, rigorous process, they get a lot better results and a lot higher savings than when it's done on an ad hoc basis. So this is the process that David and I normally use when we're running a tender. So the first thing we do is put a lot of time into the preparation to make sure we understand what the requirements are, what the products or services are that are needed, the volumes, current prices, and then any other requirements. From there, it's worth putting together a good professional looking tender pack, but make sure that the suppliers are getting all the information that they need to be able to give you an accurate proposal. And it also just helps to get them to treat you seriously when you're doing this. When you get the responses back from the suppliers, and it normally takes about 2 to 3 weeks for them to respond, the next step is to go through and analyse the responses. And that can be fairly data heavy, to go through all of the different pricing options, compare them to what you're currently paying, and look at who has the most competitive proposal. So we would normally do that, then shortlist the best looking suppliers and have further discussions with, which leads on to negotiations. So when we get to negotiations with the shortlisted suppliers, we do this in quite a formal, structured way, where we put together a presentation for them that shows areas where they might have misunderstood things or didn't quite get their proposal right. And then we also give them really detailed feedback on how competitive their pricing was. So we might tell them that for this group of products, your pricing is 5 to 10% higher than the benchmark that we got. And then on these other products, your pricing is more like 15 to 20% higher than the benchmark. So we do that, and then we give them a second chance to go away and revise their proposal and come back with a second offer. And we see that the savings that we get between the first round and the second round really improved dramatically, particularly when you're looking at incumbents who suddenly realise that the process is quite serious. So we do that. We then do a final analysis of the responses that have come back, develop a range of scenarios for awarding the business. So we might look at scenarios where we award part of the business to one supplier and part to another, and compare that to if we gave it all to one supplier, say. So we do that. We work with our stakeholders to make a final decision, and then we move through awarding the business and putting contracts in place. So that can be a reasonably time-consuming process, and it can be quite detailed, but if you do this every 2 or 3 years for your major suppliers, it can deliver really good value, and it's really well worth doing. Then once you've developed your strategy and you've gone to market and sourced the things that you need, we think the next most important thing is to make sure you've got a good performance management system or supply management system in place. This really makes sure that you can capture all the value that you've identified and that it gets sustained over the life of the contract. So we would typically recommend doing this by having a periodic formal review with your key suppliers, whether it's every 3, 6 months or whatever works for your business, where you sit down, you take the input that you've received from your business and your stakeholders around their performance and have a discussion on how well they're going against set KPIs or SLAs, talk about any issues that have occurred and agree on actions to address those. And then we also work with them to jointly develop opportunities for improvement, and whether that's areas where the quality of the products or service can be improved, ways to improve service performance, or opportunities to reduce costs through changing specifications, product re-engineering, or other strategies. So we do that, and then together develop an improvement plan that we'll both work on over the next 6 months to improve benefits. So they're really the 3 key elements to having a really good procurement function that can deliver value for your business. So next up, we're going to talk a little bit about how we're seeing the market at the moment and some of the opportunities that we're seeing coming up through the disruption that's been occurring.
Thanks, Peter. So we're seeing real opportunities in the commodity market. There have been some very significant price drops, obviously in response to COVID, but the scale is really worth noting that oil is down 42%, sugar 33%, wheat is down by 9%, and global dairy by about 15% as well. This is important because it impacts not just the commodity prices of what we might be buying, but also the byproducts, things that are made using these commodities or other goods that are impacted by these commodities. So, for example, freight is clearly going to be impacted by the price of oil because it depends on the cost of petrol. Sugar is actually highly correlated with oil because of the link with ethanol production. And of course, all the oil and petroleum byproducts feed into the price of plastics and detergents and cleaning chemicals. So the net result of this is that there are potentially some really good opportunities for commodities. And here all I've done is I've just drilled down into a bit more detail on some of the more localized type items. And look, it's a very similar picture. In freight, plastics, cardboard, and labor, the ones I've pulled out, what we're seeing is the commodities that really drive their prices, the prices of these commodities are down, demand itself is down, and we'd be expecting there to be surplus capacity in the market as well. So even though these markets are a little more localized, we think there are probably some good opportunities here also.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. Yeah, it's been really interesting that with the drop in demand through the coronavirus crisis, we are seeing manufacturers and segments of the economy where businesses are looking to find volume to keep their production lines running, which is a challenge that lots of companies here are facing. But we're thinking it is presenting a really good opportunity to go to market for categories that you need to source and lock in good savings now before the economy starts to fully recover. So they were the brief insights that we wanted to cover off around the market conditions at the moment. And next we wanted to just talk to you a bit more about the buying group that we've been working on, and how that works. So this slide just outlines the basic structure and the mechanism for the buying group. So what we do is we'll, when we decide on the category that members are asking us to source, then we'll gather up all of the member needs. We'll run a competitive tender or an RFP to source those goods. We'll select a preferred supplier, and then we'll put in place an umbrella agreement for the group. One thing we should say is that we never put in place an umbrella agreement or select a supplier unless we've been through a good competitive process and we know that the pricing they're offering is as good as we can get in the market at the moment. And the umbrella agreement that we put in place is an agreement between Fulcrum and the supplier. And it basically just says that the supplier will provide the agreed pricing to any members of Melbourne North Food Group who wish to buy from that supplier. So it's quite a nice arrangement because it means that there's no direct obligations on members. You can look at the pricing that comes through and then make your own decision on whether you want to buy from that supplier. So we can put in place the umbrella agreement without having to lock anybody into having to use it. From there, where members do decide that they're happy with that supplier that we've nominated and want to move forward, it does operate very much like a normal supply arrangement where you put orders in with the supplier after you've set up a normal account. They provide the goods or services, and then you pay them directly as you normally would. So David and I have, between us, have sourced just about every category that you ever buy within a food manufacturing company. So we've sourced most of the ingredients, most of the different packaging categories, and then a heap of the different indirects, so cleaning chemicals, PPE, freight, and then things like stationery and travel and those sorts of things. Interestingly, what we see quite consistently is that for the indirect categories and the tail items, savings can be quite significant. So you see savings of 10, 15, 20% or more for the manufacturing indirects and general indirects. Whereas things like ingredients, which are a lot more commoditized and generally get a lot more attention because they're high spend, savings there tend to be a bit less. So, but you can definitely achieve real value right across all the categories. So in terms of how you work with the buying group, there's really three different options for how to do it. The first one is to just use an existing agreement that we've put in place. So a good example of this is the micro tender, which we've just run and finished now. So we're just getting that contract signed off now, and then basically that'll be available for any members to use whenever they want to. The second option is to join a tender and participate in the sourcing. So whenever we're planning to go to tender, we'll put out emails and announcements to the membership group, letting them know what we're doing, and we'll request information on the types of products you use, the volumes and things like that, so we can consolidate up everyone's volumes into a single tender. That allows you to, I guess, get an understanding of what we're doing right through the process and have some input into the final decision-making process. And then finally, if you've got specific unique requirements for your business that others aren't likely to use, then it's something we can certainly help with, and do feel free to give us a call, and on a case-by-case basis we can look at how we can help members directly. So we ran a survey of members, it was late last year now, just asking who would be interested in being involved in a buying group and what sort of categories you would be interested in a sourcing. So these were the results of that survey. So 81% of respondents said that cardboard packaging was a category they'd like to have sourced. And you can see transport and labels were high, as well as electricity and insurance. So we've looked at this and then balanced it with how complex or difficult each category is to source, and what sort of benefit we think is likely to be there for members to come up with a plan over the next 12 months. So we started off with micro-testing and sugar, which we'll talk about a bit more. And then the next two categories we're taking to market are going to be transport, so primarily line haul into major customer DCs, and then also flexible packaging. So we'll be sending out more information on that fairly soon. So I'll hand over to David to just do a quick run through of where we got to with micro-testing and then touch on sugar.
Just seeing if I've unmuted now. Yep. So we conducted our first tender for micro-testing, and we were able to drive some really significant savings for the Melbourne North members. We started by talking with a range of the members. So we really wanted to understand their micro-testing needs, the key tests they use, the volumes, the prices. And then we went to market with the type of structured process, just like we described. Eventually, we narrowed it down to serious discussions with 4 suppliers, and we went through 3 rounds of tendering. When we conducted the evaluation, we were very clear to do it both in terms of service capabilities and commercial strength, or the prices available. And we really want to emphasize the service capabilities here is vital. This is the quality of the laboratories, the specifications, the scale, the other service they offer, because we're acutely aware we're in a COVID or post-COVID world, and that hygiene is a non-negotiable. You really need a trusted partner for this that you can rely on. And the fact that Peter's microbiology background in food hygiene means that we're absolutely rigorous in our ability to do this. And we also obviously had a focus on cost savings. Now, SGS, after 3 rounds, were clearly the winner. They performed very strongly on both criteria. They're a global firm with an excellent reputation. They built a new lab in Melbourne in October 2019, so they're expanding aggressively in Australia. Based on that, if we have a look at the right-hand side, this shows the types of savings we were able to find for the members. And this is based on the data for the members who participated in our request for information. So the types of savings we were finding are shown on the y-axis. That's how high up and down that side you are. And the savings on the micro-test budget were between 10 and 55% of the budget that could be saved if the members who responded to our request had changed their supplier to take up SGS as the preferred supplier. And we were finding an average of about 25 to 30%. The other thing I'd point out about this is it really shows the power of a rigorous and structured process and of a buying group. In the final round, we were actually able to exact target pricing on the key tests and say that these are the prices that you need to beat in order to be competitive for the final determination. And this is what enabled us to drive the prices down for members so much. And just very quickly, if you're interested in finding out more about micro-testing and joining the buying group, give us a call or email and we'll forward the onboarding pack. But as I said, we're getting the contracts now and it should be ready to go very shortly. And next slide, thank you. And we've also been working on sugar. Now, sugar is a commodity and it works slightly differently. And the key value levers in sugar are timing and volume. And you do need to move quickly. So if you look on the left-hand side, that's the price of sugar over the last 15 years. And the things to note are that it fluctuates a lot, but currently it's really comparatively low. We're reaching a level below which it hasn't dropped for a sustained period since the GFC. So the timing at the moment is looking promising. And the other key thing to manage is volume. Sugar is a commodity that's a concentrated industry. They have high supplier power. So we really need to aggregate volume to get the suppliers to sit up and take notice. And that's exactly what the buying group can do. So it identifies the right time, it coordinates members' needs and timings, and then can aggregate volumes for bulk discounts. So again, if you're interested in finding out more about sugar, just get in touch with us.
Well, thanks, David. Yeah, so this is just about the last slide. So yeah, just in terms of next steps, as we mentioned, we've got the micro testing arrangements in place now. We're working on sugar with a number of members at the moment. And then the next two that we'll be sending out information on shortly are flexible plastics and transport. Having said that, if there are other categories that members are really keen for us to source or really need some support with, then feel free to let us know. We've got capacity and we are able to do more if there's a need for it. Otherwise, if there's anything from the presentation that you'd like to know more about, or just talk through a bit more on how to develop a sourcing strategy, yeah, feel free to give us a call. We're definitely more than happy to have those calls and have those chats.
Thanks, Peter and David. So we're going to be taking some questions now. We do have a question that's come through from Pablo in the chat. So yeah, if you do have a question, just please enter it in the chat. But he's asked, do you ever incorporate corporate, social and environmental procurement conditions in RFP? I know we focus on supporting local suppliers, including MNFG members, for example.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Pablo. We talk, when we do this, we do talk to all of the members about what's important to them and what they're looking for from the suppliers. So if corporate social responsibility or sustainability is something that's really important for you, we can definitely capture that in the tender, and we can ask all of the potential suppliers a whole lot of questions about what their policies are in this area and what they can do to support customers. And look, you might find at the end of the day that there'll be some members that are purely just focused on cost, and that's all that's important to them. And then there might be a group of members where corporate social responsibility is really important. So we may end up with a solution that allows both and ends up with two suppliers. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Beautiful, nice question, Pablo. There's no other questions that have popped up so far, so maybe we'll wrap it up. But yeah, David and Peter will have the details available. I'm going to send out an email after this. Oh, hold on, Pablo's come back again. Is there a cost to members?
So no, the way the cost and pricing work for the buying group is that at the end of the tender, we charge a rebate to the supplier, which gets paid back to us. So we set that so that roughly about 80% of any value that's achieved through the tenders gets passed directly to members, and then a rebate comes to us to fund the work that we're doing. So there's no upfront cost to members.
Okay, great. So, right, no more questions. So yeah, we'll send out the invite, the email after this with Peter and David's details. So if there is anything you'd like to follow up about the presentation, feel free to contact them. We'll also include the recording from the session and the slides, so you can refer back to them in future. But I think that's about it. So thanks, Peter and David. Really appreciate your presentation today. It was really great. And I think we'll wrap it up there.
Cool. Yeah, thanks very much, Tyler. We definitely appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, we're looking forward to what we can do with the buying group. It should be really exciting.
Absolutely, it's exciting stuff. And thanks everyone else who joined us today.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers, bye for now.